Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining us today for our webinar on defining data access security policies as part of a cybersecurity architecture. We're joined today by one of our colleagues at Accenture, Ansley Hammer, who will be providing her insights as well. Just to go over our agenda for today. Today, I'll introduce the members of the team that will be on the call. Then we'll go over some of the challenges in defining cybersecurity architectures. Then go over what are data access security policies, as well as how you would define those data access security policies as part of your cybersecurity architecture. And then I have a few use cases and demos of NextLab solutions that I'll be able to show you. And then we'll move into a Q&A section at the end. Just a few logistics before we get started. This webinar will be recorded, and everyone who registered or attended will receive a link to that recording afterwards. Feel free to share the link to this recording with anyone that might find it useful. Also, we will have questions. We have a time for Q&A at the end. If you have any questions during the webinar, go ahead and ask them through the Zoom webinar interface. There should be a Q&A button at the bottom of the Zoom window, and you can ask your questions through that. And we'll either answer them during the webinar or at the end during the Q&A section. So with that, let me introduce who we have on the webinar today. So we have Ansley Hammer from Accenture, who's Data Security Manager. We have myself, Tony Burning. I'm Senior Product Manager at NextLabs. And then also from NextLabs, my colleague Pratab Sakala, who's the VP of Engineering, who will be joining us for the Q&A section at the end. So with that, we'll go ahead and dive right into the content.
So let's discuss the challenges in defining cybersecurity architecture as relates to data security. There's a constant push and pull between two topics: the need to share and the need to protect. Organizations with global business models, large third-party external partners, and distributed supply chains have to balance this, because you have to share data that's sometimes proprietary or controlled with these partners, but you also have the obligation to protect these things. Now, there are several different scenarios that come into play with this, obviously, but a common example we often see is protecting intellectual property. You need to share with a manufacturer perhaps how a material is to be engineered, how things are to be made. However, you still need to protect that data so that the competitors cannot weaponize that information against you or take it to one of your competitors, things like that. A lot of times you'll be working with partners, say in advertising, and governance and compliance comes into play with that immensely. Data privacy regulations such as the General Data Protection Regulation and California Consumer Privacy Act govern that you cannot exchange data of consumers that is later lost. You're under obligation and regulatory pressure to keep that data secure. Also, with the need to share, you have issues with agility and efficiency. You want to be able to accelerate times to market. You want to make sure high availability is given on your cloud and your mobile platforms. Balancing these two needs is where good architecture and security best practice for data security and exchange and governance comes into play. So how do you protect the sensitive information and still share them with the extended enterprise? How do you keep that information flowing without introducing new risks? Let's discuss some pathways to that. So with security requirements being more complex, we've sort of introduced the 10,000-foot view earlier. It's going to continue to get more complex. You'll hear phrases in the space of data is the new oil. It's a major asset for your organization. And just as data security is sort of growing in the industry and becoming a hot topic, you're only going to see complexity increase in this market sector. So what are some things that make it more complicated that we see sort of coming down the line that are going to impact these processes? We've got 4 main things up here for you. And these are the ones where we believe there's going to be the most growth. So the first is going to be your security threats. That is more than just keeping hackers out of your network and keeping bad actors from distributing information. You're going to see things like insider threat become an issue. It's how to keep your intellectual property on that principle of least privilege within your organization. How do I keep my own people from weaponizing data and information that causes me harm or loss? Distributed systems increase complexity because of restrictions. Oftentimes, physical isolation is just not possible. With cloud-based, you're not always sure where your data lives. If you're looking at a system like AWS, Azure, or GCP, you could be spread out against multiple data centers in multiple locales, and the traceability of the information just isn't there, especially with high availability models and varying configurations of cloud, and even in hybrid environments, the data just becomes impossible to track physical location. So we are relying more and more on roles-based or attribute-based access control, things like that, to contain that data as it moves throughout the ecosystem. Emerging regulations, CCPA and GDPR are sort of the spearhead of this area, but that's only going to get more complex. There are already laws in talks in New York State and other states in the US and other countries around the world, such as India, where this is going to continue to impact the way we all do business. As systems become more interconnected and redundancy and availability, as I was talking to you earlier with cloud, extends to an international scale, you're going to find that complexity just increases exponentially. And lastly, innovation. As our world readies for quantum computing and the next generation of information processing, data warehousing, and data lakes, and the analysis you can place upon that with AI, ML, and all these exciting new things, that is going to give you more and more systems that are potential targets for attack and many different attack vectors. We find a lot of times being able to control how encryption is implemented within your environment, things such as algorithm management, are becoming paramount as older standards are deprecated due to the capabilities of an ever-changing quantum computing world. So how do we address this? So we've come up at Accenture with a cybersecurity architecture and strategy that focuses on 6 key areas. Now, this is going to span across people, process, and technology. So effective data security architecture starts with a strategy. That's your information security strategy as a whole. You're going to have a part that builds that program, but data security in our model has its own corporate strategy. It has a vision for the governance, integration, protection, and control of data, to the earlier points that I was talking to. Second, you're relying upon that governance vision. That's simply managing the flow of data through your organization and ensuring that security and, of course, our CIA triad, continuity of the data. You want to make sure it's available, it is integrated, and is correct for your customers. The next area that we work on is data integration. And that's incorporating that crossover between technological and business processes that aligns the data from all of those sources as they are dynamically changing. If you have quantum computing coming into your environment, how does that integrate with the next generation of security tools? Data integration is going to allow you to manage things like that. Next, we have protection, which is what everybody tends to think of when you deal with data security. it's not just protecting the data anymore. Protection is simply a set of technologies or tools that are layered on top of your existing controls, such as data at rest encryption, tokenization for data in motion, and it secures the contents of the data from unauthorized access and potential loss. Because remember, we discussed earlier with the constant relocation of data in cloud security and hybrid environments, you may not know where it physically lies. So access becomes that sort of new perimeter for you guys to protect that data. And it starts with the roles and the attributes. Next, we have data control. So that's the implementation of technical capabilities that enforces the movement or transmission of data. So after you've had all of these other layers of control that come in, they protect the data at rest, they ensure it's able to move via channels that are certified to be safe. Control is where you ensure the data stays in its known pathways. You have a dedicated road in and out of a facility. Control is something of that sort. You want to make sure data is not flowing down pathways where it shouldn't. Understanding the upstream and downstream data going into your applications and making sure it's only moving where you want it to. Lastly, analytics. How do you enforce all of this? How do you benchmark your strategy? How do you ensure that the technologies and everything that you've placed in your environment are working correctly? And how do you report that to your senior leadership? Analytics comes in with awareness and processing that helps you not only drive compliance for your security system, but also utilizing data as a business asset. As data's potential to be utilized grows with growing technology, we find many companies are sitting on treasure troves of big data stores. You have all this data and you're not sure what its value is just yet. So to sort of mine the gold out of that, that's where analytics comes in. From a security perspective, it's about monitoring your program, setting goals, and making sure your organizational change management can align with your goals and being realistic as you set them, but also to look at how do we position ourselves for the next business case to make our data work for us.
Thanks, Ansley. So now I'm going to go into a little bit about what data access security policies are and how they're defined. So at a high level, at a basic level, the data access security policy defines what data is protected, who is able to access it, and under what conditions. And although this sounds simple, this can actually get a lot more complicated than it appears at face value. So for the first point, and this is becoming more and more the case, data sets may be spread across multiple locations, or conversely, like different data sets actually may be stored in the same database. So both of those situations need to be accounted for. And how do you apply a consistent security policy across data that's either spread across multiple locations, or how do you apply different data security policies to different data sets that are in the same database? The second point is that employee roles are always changing, or internal processes and controls may change. So whether an employee is moving from one group to another, is getting promoted, has their security clearance level updated, all of these things are constantly changing. And your data access security policies need to account for that so that everyone always has the right access. You don't want someone accidentally having access to files that they should no longer have access to because either internal controls changed or their position changed or their clearance changed. And then finally, with more geographically distributed teams, and this is especially true in the current environment, employees may be accessing data from different time zones, different geographies, different hours outside of normal business hours because they're in, on the other side of the world. And all of this needs to be accounted for. There are some things that need to be controlled by geography, both in terms of like the servers that they reside on, as well as where they're being accessed from. And that may be either your own, organization's own internal controls or outside regulations that are controlling that. But this makes the design and application of data access security policies a little bit more complicated. So as an example of how, at least within NextLab's products, you can define an attribute-based data access security policy. Here's an example where we're combining attributes from multiple sources. So we're combining attributes of users that are accessing it, the environment that they're accessing the data in, the attributes of the data itself, which such as like how it's classified, the ECCN number, and then also the application that's being accessed in. And then finally, as part of the policy, what you can do with that data. So as an example, here we might use attributes to restrict access to a manager who's a US citizen, who's currently in region X, and then enforce environmental attributes to say that it's only from a specific device that they're accessing it from, or it's only from a device that's in a certain country or a certain location, and it's only during their specified work hours where they are expected to be accessing the resource. And then finally, so adding in the resource attributes where limiting it, having this apply to, in this case, nuclear maintenance data within SAP ERP. And then we would allow them to, depending on their attributes, view it, change that data, print, extract, download that data. All of that can be defined as part of the data access security policy. So when you're working the data access security policies into your cybersecurity architecture, an important thing to consider is that it really should be a core part of how you're designing that architecture. It's not something to be bolted on afterwards or figured out after the rest of your architecture has already been defined. It really needs to be part of the planning process. So if you're migrating from one system to another, again, whether that's from on-premise to the cloud or even consolidating systems into or multiple databases into a single database, defining the correct data access security policies need to be a part of the process and a core component of the process throughout. That's so that the systems can be appropriately designed, the data structures can be designed to support those data access security policies instead of them being a hindrance or making it more difficult if they're being defined afterwards. So, and another piece is that as you're doing these projects, the implementation projects, the transition projects, the migration projects, the policies need to be defined to make sure that all the data is correctly handled before the project, during the project itself, as well as after the projects, because it's important that the data is kept secure throughout all of those different stages and it's not compromised at any point. So with that, now I'm going to move into a few use cases and give you a couple of demos as to how this can be implemented using NextLab's products. In this example, we're going to take a look at using the NextLab SharePoint Enforcer to manage access to structured data within SharePoint. We have set up two libraries, one for visit documents and one for sensitive documents. We'll start with the visit documents. The library has been set up to have a policy that restricts users from uploading documents related to visits that are still in development. So only production visit files are allowed to be uploaded to the visit document library. To see that in action, we're going to take the same files that we've been using and upload them to this document library. We can see immediately that 3 of the files failed to upload because the policy denied them, saying they're not authorized to be uploaded here. And those are the files related to development visits. If we refresh, we can see the 7 remaining files are what's left, and we're going to check those in so that everybody can see them. So now everyone sees the same list of documents in the document library. Here we are Bob, and he sees those same files. Chris sees the same 7 files as well. However, their access to the files is still limited. For example, Bob is not part of the Intrepid project, and so if Bob tries to open an Intrepid file, he's denied. But if Chris tries to open the Intrepid files, he is authorized to access them. So there we have access control using SharePoint Enforcer, where users see all the files, but they're limited on what they can open. Next, we're going to look at the sensitive documents library. The sensitive documents library allows you to upload all of the files. There are no restrictions against the files related to development visits. Anne is going to attempt to upload all the files to this library. As you can see, she is able to upload all 10 files. The difference is that we've set up trimming on this library. And what we've done is configure the trimming to only show users the files related to visits that they're assigned to. So, if you're not assigned to a particular visit, you're not going to see the files associated with that visit. For example, Bob goes to the sensitive items and refreshes the page. We see that he only sees the files associated with the visits he's assigned to. He doesn't see Intrepid, for example, but he does see all the files for the Jupiter project. Even the files related to the Spoke, which he doesn't have access to. That's because the way we've configured the trimming is based on visit. But if he, even though he sees Spoke, if he clicks on it, he still gets denied access. And Chris, in the same way, if he goes and refreshes this page, he only sees files related to visits he's assigned to. For example, he doesn't see NextGen or Epsilon. He's able to view and open the project files, and he's authorized to access as well. So here we can see that NextLab SharePoint Enforcer manages not only access to structured files within SharePoint, but is also managing things like the ability to upload files to a specific location as well. In this demonstration of NextLab's Windows Desktop Enforcer, or WDE, we will review the solution that meets the following security compliance requirements. Users can only access classified files for which they have the clearance. Users must be a citizen of at least one of the countries listed on the releasable to property of the files. Users must have qualifications for all of the communities of interest, or COI, attributes of the files. And finally, files with a COI of Tiger may only be opened while in the United States. Here you can see the list of users that we will use for this demo: Anne, Bob, Chris, and Dan. In this demo, we are using Active Directory as the identity provider. So let's look at the properties for these users. First, we'll start with Anne. Anne is a citizen of the United States, has a clearance level of top secret, and is a member of the COIs of Tiger, Lion, Bear, Bananas, and Apples. Now we'll look at the properties for Bob. Bob is a citizen of the United States, has a clearance level of secret, and is a member of the COIs of Bananas and Apples. When we look at Chris's properties, we can see that his citizenship is Canada, he has a clearance level of secret, and he's a member of Lion, Bear, and Bananas COIs. Finally, we'll look at Dan. Dan is a citizen of Canada, has a top secret clearance, and is a member of the COIs of Tiger and Apples. So in this case, a Canadian citizen has been given a secret clearance. But despite this, sample C is meant to be only viewed in the United States or by US citizens. So let's log in as Chris, who is a Canadian citizen with a secret clearance. He is going to be denied access to the sample C spreadsheet because the document is releasable only to the United States. Now we'll log in as Bob, who is a US citizen and also has secret clearance. Bob will be allowed to open the sample C spreadsheet because he is a US citizen. This is a requirement of the document being only releasable to the United States. So now let's look at some of the document properties. We can see that this document has a classification of secret, and it's releasable to the United States. So in many cases, restricting access based on citizenship isn't enough. In addition to citizenship, viewing classified files on foreign soil can constitute a security risk. So we'll see in this demonstration that document D is meant to be only viewed by US citizens within the United States with top secret clearance and membership in the Tiger COI. So we'll log in as Dan from a workstation that's located in Canada. Dan is a Canadian citizen with top secret clearance and a COI of Tiger, but he will be denied access to open the sample D document because the workstation is not in the United States, despite his clearance and a COI. Now we'll log in as Anne to a workstation that is located in the United States. Anne is a US citizen with top secret clearance and a COI of Tiger, so she will be able to access the file and open the sample D document. Now we can look at the document properties. We can see that this document has a classification as top secret and it's a COI of Tiger. Here we can see how NextLab's Windows Desktop Enforcer is used. In this demo, we'll show the NextLab's Entitlement Manager for SMB. We'll show attribute-based access controls and dynamic authorization for AWS S3. In this architecture diagram, we see the NextLab's Control Center server. This is where dynamic authorization policies are created and managed. We also see the NextLab's Entitlement Manager for SMB. This is a server that is protecting AWS 3 and Azure files. Instead of users connecting directly to the cloud storage, they connect to the NextLab's Entitlement Manager. Here, we have mapped the SMB share directly to the AWS S3 bucket. 52.24.126.52 is my EC2 instance hosting the storage gateway. EM_SMB demo is my SMB share. Next, mapped a new SMB share to 10.2.0.7. This is my NextLab's Entitlement Management server that is protecting the same AWS SMB share. We will show file access control based on user attributes, file content, file properties, and the file path. We'll show folder access control based on user attributes and the folder path. File operations, in the file operations we will show the create, view, copy, move, edit, and delete. Here's a list of our Active Directory users and their department and license attributes. Our demo environment consists of 2 Windows 10 workstations, 2 Windows 2019 servers, an AWS S3 bucket, and Azure File Store. In this use case, we will restrict the ability to create folders and files in an AWS S3 bucket by using the user department attribute. Only users in the HR department will be allowed to create in the HR folder. First, we'll log in as Freddie Luddy from the development department and open the HR folder. Let's try to create a folder and a file. We can see that we're denied. Now let's log in as Carol Welch from the HR department and open the same HR folder. Again, we'll try to create a folder and a file. Here we can see that we're allowed. In the next use case, we will restrict viewing files in an AWS S3 bucket by matching the user license attribute to the document property. Only users with matching licenses are able to view files in the sales folder. First, we'll log in as Don Goodlife that has a user license of 1002. We'll open up the sales folder and try to open the customer 4 document. We're denied because the document license property is 1004. Now let's open the customer 2 document. In this case, we're allowed because the document license property is 1002. Now let's log in as John Patterson that has a user license of 1004. We'll open up the sales folder and try to open the customer 2 document. We're denied because the document license property is 1002. Now we'll open up the customer 4 document and we'll be allowed because the document license property is 1004. In this use case, we'll restrict a folder in an AWS S3 bucket by using the user department attribute. Only users in the sales department will be allowed to open up the contracts folder. First, we'll log in as Don Goodlife from the development department, open up the sales folder, and we'll be denied when we try to open up the contracts folder. Now we'll log in as John Patterson from the sales department. We'll open up the sales folder. Now we're allowed to open up the contracts folder. In this use case, we'll restrict editing files in an AWS S3 bucket by matching the user license attribute to the document property. Only users with matching licenses are able to edit the files in the finance folder. First, we'll log in as Gary Fired with a user license of 1003. Let's go to the finance folder and open up the inventory spreadsheet. We're able to open up the spreadsheet, but we can see that it's read-only. If you try to save any changes, you'll be denied because the document license property is 1002. Now we'll log in as Don Goodlife that has a user license of 1002. We'll go to the finance folder and open up the same inventory spreadsheet. We're able to open and edit the spreadsheet because the document license property is 1002. In the next use case, we'll restrict the ability to move and copy files in an AWS S3 bucket by using the user department attribute. Only users in the HR department will be allowed to move or copy files into the HR folder. First, we'll log in as Gary Fired from the finance department. We'll open up the HR folder and we'll try to move a file into the HR folder. You can see that we're denied. Now we'll try to copy and paste the file into the HR folder. We're denied again. Now we'll log in as Carol Welch from the HR department. We'll go and open up the HR folder. And again, we'll try to move a file into the HR folder. And you can see in this case, we're allowed. Now, let's copy and paste the file into the same HR folder. You can see this is also allowed. In this use case, we'll restrict deleting files in an AWS S3 bucket by using the user department attribute and a keyword in the file. Only users in the development department will be allowed to delete files in the development folder with the keyword design. Let's log in as Gary Fired from the finance department and open up the development folder. We'll open up the design v1 document, and we can see the keyword design. Now we'll try to delete the document, and we're denied. Now we'll log in as Freddie Luddy, who's from the development department, and open up the same development folder. Here we'll try to delete the design v1 file. In this case, we're allowed. In this last use case, we'll restrict deleting folders in an AWS S3 bucket by using the user department attribute. Only users in the development department will be allowed to delete folders in the code folder. So first, we'll log in as Gary Fired from the finance department and open the code folder. We're denied when we tried to delete the folder. Now we'll log in as Freddie Luddy from the development department, open the same code folder, and now we're going to be able to delete a folder. All right, now we're going to open it up for any questions. Just as a reminder, you can ask any questions through the Zoom webinar interface. There's a Q&A button at the bottom of the screen, and you can type your questions there, and then we'll get to them. Also, just as a reminder, while we're waiting for any questions to come in, this webinar is being recorded, and all attendees and registrants will receive a link to the webinar recording probably either once we get that uploaded, so either later today or tomorrow. So with that, one of the questions that I have is how to design cybersecurity for systems that are constantly changing. And so I'll be reading a little bit in between the lines on what this question is asking, but my assumption is that the question is about with dynamic systems that where maybe you have multiple departments that are affecting the systems, or large organizations that have lots of users, where users may be joining or leaving, changing roles, changing departments, that sort of thing. How do you design for that? One of the things that that at least at Next Labs that we have in our products is, or we propose, is having a lot of the policies automatically use user attributes. So if someone changes the department, the user attributes are fetched and used in the policy evaluation at the time of data access requests, so that you can always get the latest, and you don't need to be you don't become out of date by having your user roles or user teams be out of date for security purposes. Ansley, do you have anything to add to that for dynamic systems and some of the tips and tricks to design for them?
Absolutely. So what we often see as the sort of state-of-the-art solution for that is having a development and security operations program. So security is kind of streamlined into your ops process, and that's how as it changes, security is considered as a part of each step. So with each change, security has a seat at the table already. That's what we see in the ideal world, but obviously that's not super common.
Thanks. Another question, and this is somewhat related, but it's like, how do you deal with like different regulatory regimes, and this would be, assume, also if your organization's operating in multiple countries and you have data centers in different countries and employees in different countries that are all subject to different regulations and regulatory regimes. So we touched on that a little bit, just talking about GDPR or CCPA, which have some similarities, but also have their own unique aspects as well. And again, this feeds into really designing a cybersecurity system and an approach and architecture that will really look at the attributes, not only of the roles that users are in or the specific data, but to take into account the environmental attributes of what systems are using to access different data, where the systems where the data resides are located, and especially since the location of the data centers and the locations of the servers does make a difference in terms of how the data needs to be kept and what needs to be taken care of. I feel like that actually makes an attribute-based access control approach even more valuable to organizations in terms of making sure that they stay compliant and don't potentially run into any issues, both in terms of losing control of their data or potentially having their data be compromised or just being fined by regulators for not being in compliance.
Yep, I will certainly echo that. Attribute-based access control is the way to get around that. We've evolved past roles-based. Now that you have different regulatory environments, you have to modify the access parameters with the attribute and based on that.
Yeah, thanks. And then a related system or a related question is how to handle shared systems. And so I'll speak to one of the areas where we have a lot of experience, speaking from NextLab's perspective. But so when we see either whether it's mergers or divestitures or even joint ventures, we see a lot of cases where companies have a need to protect data that's residing in the same on the same system or in the same data lake or data warehouse, but whereas some of that data, different parts of that data should be accessed by different groups of people, even though they're being kept in the same place. And that's definitely something that needs to be considered, also in the process of an acquisition or a divestiture or setting up a joint venture, because you really need to plan for every stage of that process. So I would say, yeah, that's definitely something that needs to be part of the planning process. A lot of times shared systems are an approach that different organizations may take, or an organization that's splitting something a sub organization off needs to have in place, just so they aren't delayed and prevented from going to market before they have the time to set up a fully independent new system. But coming back to ABAC again, attribute-based access control, that's our approach to solving that issue and dealing with what can be a very complex situation. And those are the questions I have so far. Ansley, I don't know if you had other questions that you've heard in your experience that you think should be addressed, or any additional points to add.
Yeah, just a couple of things in line with the questions that we've kind of received so far. As a data security program goes, and we've gone into what the strategy, looks like, and everything to do with these programs, it starts with an effective strategy. You really have to anchor back to, what are my regulatory obligations? How do I currently share data in my environment? Do you have things like lineage? Do you have things in place to understand how data is created and how it flows? And I think your program will be successful every time if you have that sort of North Star and you anchor to your strategy and use great tools, of course, like we've featured here, to help perpetuate and move that mission along.
Okay, great. Thanks. Yeah, I don't see any other questions right now. So what I'll say is I'd like to thank Ansley again for joining us today. I'd like to thank everyone for taking the time to join us and attend the webinar. If you do have any other follow-up questions, you can definitely reach out to us. And again, that you will be receiving a link to the recording, and do feel free to share that with anyone who might find it useful. So with that, I'll say thanks again, and we'll be in touch. Thanks.
Thank you, everyone.